To say that your hands are dirty is an understatement. Ruined or maybe disfigured are more accurate words. Your thin fingers, locked into permanent arthritic hooks that refuse to loosen even in sleep, are soot black to the knuckle. Not from decay, disease, or some industrial lubricant, but from ink. The pigment has crept up to your knuckles in uneven waves, while splotches of it stain the flesh of your palms and forearms. Such details serve as an easy identifier of your station, 4th level ordinate of Scriptum Block 94. The itching has faded over the years. What once burned and irritated now barely registers, the delicate skin of your hands finally numbed after years of constant exposure. A heavy clunk shakes you from your musings, the sound of something heavy hitting something heavier. You hear a scrape, followed by the sound of the prefect's soft boots marching quickly along the narrow aisle behind you, off toward the echoing disturbance. You do not dare to look up. You made that mistake once and paid for it with the loss of your shift release permit. The 18 hours of continuous supervised transcription that followed was punishment enough to deter any future curiosity. A bead of sweat slips from your thin hairline, threatening this hour's labour. You catch it with the back of your hand, dragging another grey smudge across your brow that no one will ever care to notice. Beyond the edge of your desk, the chamber falls away into a distant, gloomy chasm. In the flickering glow of 1,000 candles, drifting lumen globes and servo skulls, hundreds of your fellow ordinates descend into the dark in tiered rows, the pattern repeating behind you in a vertigo-inducing symmetry that, to a novice, seems to have no end. Each ordinate sits upon a certifiable throne of parchment, backs bent, necks craned, and bodies folded inward towards their meticulous workings, as if gravity pulls them ever closer to the page. The air is thick with the sound of scratching quills and the stench of ink, old paper, candle smoke, and body odour. A bell chimes to mark the passing of the 7th hour. You pay it no heed. You do not need to. Your body has developed its own clock in the means of a painful rhythmic throb in your wrist that signals roughly when your second inkwell will be 3/4 empty.
Subject 9, level 1402, waste reclamation system, status stable.
A voice crackles lifelessly through your audio feed. You dip, you scrape, you write. SS9 L1402. Stable.
Hive Primus, Subject 9, level 1403, waste reclamation system, status stable.
The voice intones. You dip, you scrape, you write. SS9 L1403. Stable.
Hive Primus, Subject 9, level 1404, waste reclamation system, status stable.
You dip, you scrape, you write. SS9 L1404. Stable.
Hive Primus, Subject 9, level 1405, waste reclamation system, status stable.
You dip, you scrape, you write. SS9 L1405. Stable.
Hive Primus, Subject 9, level 1406, waste reclamation system, status detected.
Your hand freezes halfway to the ink pot. Detected? Is that what you heard? That word does not belong here. What was detected? How? Why? What? You replay it internally, trying to decide whether it was real or just interference or degradation in the line. A cold shiver runs up your spine. In all your years, you have never heard of any status other than stable. Of course you haven't. Why would you have? Imperial infrastructure is stable. It is defined by stability. It has to be stable. How could it be any other way in his Imperium?
Hive Primus, Subject 9, level 1407, waste reclamation system, status stable.
The voice continues in your skull, totally indifferent. Are you supposed to guess? Do you dare waste the prefect's time with a question? You were not trained for this. No one is trained for this. By the throne, why has this happened to you? This is madness. Wait, the master sheet. Yes, the master sheet will clarify everything. You pull desperately, the endless parchment spilling from the station's open maw. Your eyes follow your finger as you scan quickly, sweat gathering more freely at your brow. There. Yes, here you go. Level 1399, 1400, 140. A drop of sweat falls and hits the sheet. Ink blooms and runs beneath it, diluting and swallowing the text. Your eyes widen as you scrub at it desperately, only making things worse as you tear a hole through the record. You force your breathing to steady, your heart to slow. There is no time for panic now, you have to act. What no one knows cannot hurt you, and it will be a decade at least before the next status check on that level. You do not have the stamina for an investigation. You do not have the strength for the penance deserved. You do not want to end up like Silas. You must be quick, you are falling behind. You dip your quill. You scrape off the excess ink. You write. You watch the ink dry. A black lie sitting comfortably at the bottom of thousands of lines of text. SS9 L1 406 Stable. Your chest loosens slightly. It was probably nothing anyway.
Hive Primus, Sub-69, level 1411, Waste Reclamation System, status, stable.
You dip. You scrape. You write. The Adeptus Administratum is the glue that binds the Imperium of Man together. It is the largest of the many divisions within the Adeptus Terra, and it is said that its adepts and menials make up the majority of Terra's population, with over 10 billion of its servants dedicated to the administration of the Imperial Palace alone. Its remit is enormous and without comparison. The Administratum does the usual things expected of an organization with such a descriptive name. It records, archives, categorizes, tallies, and administers, but it also oversees population censuses, inventories, and logistics at a galactic scale. It levies and collects the tithe, redacts and controls documentation, and extends its reach, influence, and control into security, intelligence, and subterfuge, agriculture, water and waste management, medicine and pharmaceuticals, and the charting and mapping of Imperial space. War fleets are raised on its authority, and the power of the Imperial Guard marches to its design. Yet much of the potential power of this administrative behemoth is strangled by its own shocking inefficiencies. Some of its branches have literally been forgotten, their original purposes lost to memory as well, swallowed by the magnitude of the organization and its responsibilities. Many others survive, but are almost purposeless, or at least they add no meaningful value, like the Departamento Processium or the Departamento Gradio, whose clerks, millions of them, exist only to handle paperwork in endless succession, bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. They do not read, interpret, or action what passes through their hands. They process it, categorize, or grade it, and send it onward to its next destination with only a childlike understanding of its purpose and contents. To make matters worse, the Administratum is majorly dependent on ink and parchment, on handwritten transcription, physical forms, and the endless duplication of work that forms the bulk of their labor. Documents, very important and very flammable documents, I might add, are stored in vaults and warehouse archives the size of city blocks, where fresh records are layered next to and on top of ancient ones until both are buried beneath centuries of accumulated administrative decay. But none of this takes away from the true power and critical importance of the Administratum. Through all the ridiculous realities you will hear about, the data miners who spend their lives tunneling through and living within literal oceans of ancient parchment, or the ciphers whose sole purpose is to memorize messages verbatim and deliver them as living vessels of information, the organization remains one of the most powerful entities within the Imperium, perhaps in the galaxy. Without it, there is no continuity, no coordination, no Imperium really, only isolated worlds and lost people, blind and starving in the void. I have touched on this before in my video on the metaphysical nightmare of Imperial logistics, but the average nameless Administratum scrivener may well be responsible for more deaths than any character you can name. With a single stroke of quill, they authorize planetary reinforcement or divert critical supplies. A misplaced file can erase an inhabited world from Imperial records, condemning billions to starvation as, over generations, merchant convoys and supply fleets simply forget it exists. A missing tithe receipt can force a compliant world to pay twice over, or invite censure and penance for failing to meet obligations they have in fact already fulfilled. For some real examples, a single clerical error, one misplaced digit, has resulted in the death of an entire guard regiment deployed to the wrong war zone. Twice, in Guns of Tanith and in the Blades of Damocles, the Administratum dispatched incompatible ammunition to active war zones, abandoning Imperial forces to charge the enemy positions with knives and bayonets. Elsewhere, bad actors within the Administratum have intentionally misfiled forms and documents, rerouting food and supplies to incorrect coordinates on purpose. These shipments rot in ship holds or loading docks, while planetside the abandoned population starve or resort to cannibalism as a result. And yet, for every catastrophe stemming from human error, incompetence, or malice, there are 1,000 quiet acts carried out exactly as intended. Forms completed and delivered without issue, messages received and transcribed accurately, records stored and preserved in their proper place. Every fleet or regiment that arrives where it is needed, every hive that continues to receive its shipments of grain and promethium on schedule, these are the true victories of the Administratum. It does not win wars in the conventional sense, but it makes those victories possible, and more importantly, survivable. Even with all its bureaucratic nonsense and shocking inefficiencies, it still keeps things moving. It keeps worlds and systems fed, armies supplied, infrastructure maintained, and manages all the other uncountable functions that are critical to the Imperium, yet too small to ever be noticed. It is not through individuals that the God Emperor exerts his will, but through the bureaucracy of the Adeptus Administratum, his most holy machine. One human effort is nothing, but together we are the greatest empire there has ever been. Be reassured that your insignificant toil aggregates with that of billions of others into something fine and mighty. In that way we serve, though we are but humble. As it stands in this dying empire of ours, the Administratum is the only force capable of imposing even the faintest semblance of unity across 1,000,000 worlds. Such is the desperate nature of things, and how deeply this institution has woven itself into the fabric of the Imperium. But what is life like for one among its number? What is life like for the statistically average Administratum adept? Usually, I would say the answer is, as with most of such questions, it depends. And it is true that the quality of life varies wildly across the organization. At its lower ends are literal slaves and data miners, messengers and archivists damned to complete shifts in perpetual motion on their feet, hauling records through endless vaulted corridors until their bodies fail them and they are replaced with the next pale, wide-eyed child. Higher up, scribe clans, functionaries, and minor officials work sealed off in claustrophobic, poorly lit cubicles, offices in name only, while others still will sit in endless rows of similarly robed clerks, wholly indistinguishable from one another. At the top of the organization, prefects and masters exist in degrees of privilege higher still, afforded proper offices, proper food, proper drink, and proper accommodation befitting one of their station. Regardless, we do know that individuals classified as ordinates constitute the most common rank within the Administratum, serving as minor administrative officials who process the bulk of its routine and unglamorous work, and so we need only understand this position to properly answer the question. For the average ordinate, work is the totality of their existence. Free time, in any meaningful sense, is non-existent. Most will spend their entire lives indoors, never once seeing the world beyond the desks, halls, chambers, and dormitories that define the limits of their reality. Generations can pass beneath the same roof, entire bloodlines raised and ended without ever stepping foot outside or breathing fresh air. A great number come to know the Imperium only through stories, second-hand accounts, or the endless tide of paperwork they process, never seeing ships, stars, or even the exterior of a building. The same corridors are walked between shifts until they are totally committed to muscle memory. The same forms are processed until the motions become automatic. Time essentially loses meaning. There is no day or night, only shift start and shift end. As scribe processes Nora Neeson reflects in Avenging Son, for some, the Imperium is an empire of words alone. It might not exist at all. So, after a mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausting shift of anywhere between 11 and 20 hours, completing, filing, grading, or otherwise handling paperwork, you are free to flow in a monotonous grey tide with the other thin, pale, and expressionless ghosts you call your colleagues down the tiled halls from your workstation to your cramped, shared dormitory. Sometimes, in those long trudges between stations, your gaze might drift upward, toward the vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, to the marble columns and arches built on a scale you cannot properly comprehend, and you might feel the faintest stirrings of curiosity at what goes on beyond your small world, before forcing the feeling down and forgetting such childlike notions as you have been taught. Imagination is the assassin of good sense. Do not think it is bad for you. Once you reach your cramped bunk hall at the furthest reaches of your world, you are issued nutrient cubes, sticks, paste, or some equally cheap and tasteless substitute before climbing into your assigned bunk, one stacked atop and beside hundreds of others, to sleep lightly for the few hours you have earned. Though even this is conditional. Your sleeping hours potentially stripped away by your superiors for poor performance or wasted time on shift. The doors to your dorm are barred during such times, watched over by armed departamento enforcers. So no, there won't be any naughty nighttime escapades for you, my friend. You sleep as one, you wake as one, eat as one, likely the same grey slop as before, then pray as one, before flowing back as one to your workstations to begin the cycle again. And so it repeats until the end of a life spent serving a role you do not, and likely never will, understand, cut short by the breaking of body or mind just in time for whatever value you produced to be lost to the corruption or incompetence of those in the generations to follow. For one in such a position, however, life does not have to be a soul-sucking void. If this must be your existence, and the Emperor's peace, insanity, or servitorization are the only alternatives, then the first and most important task for you is to impose meaning upon your work, however tedious and repetitive it may be. Many find this through faith or religious zeal. Others come to recognize true value in their work despite knowing how unlikely that reality may be. Whatever you do, find purpose. For this is how so many billions survive the horror of life within the Administratum, with hidden idols tucked beneath pillows and old picts hidden up sleeves. Just try not to make too many mistakes, as you'll undoubtedly have to justify your KD ratio when you stand before the Emperor in judgment. Anyway, thanks for watching. Dystopian Chimp, out.